if you really were thinking that way, you have to be thinking very pragmatically about whether you can get these negotiations to the point of there is a win-win, or at least that one side doesn't lose too much. And that is not a real estate deal. That's not what's happening here, because Russia is going to take some Ukrainian real estate. Regrettably, Russia is going to occupy some Ukrainian land. So the goal here is make sure they don't occupy too much of it and they don't keep the rest of Ukraine weak. Ukraine is hopefully going to get some sense of security with these guarantees, but they're still going to have to face the Russians on their doorstep. So the best you can get is an arrangement in which each side gets a bit of what it wants out of this in the short term. And then in the long term, the best thing you can get is that Ukraine gets the support from Europe and indeed from the United States, hopefully from the United States, where it can continue to build and strengthen itself while Russia has to deal with the fact that it's occupying territory that it's destroyed.
You just mentioned about this matter of security guarantees. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky just said that this deal on security guarantees for Ukraine was ready for 100%. And Ukraine right now is just waiting date and time to schedule this signature process, right? For date and time for signature meeting summit to sign this deal. However, it seems like Americans hesitate to sign the deal before the war ends or before the final peace deal is reached, right?
Yeah. So this brings everything together we've been talking about. What Zelensky's trying to do is he's trying to bump the United States into confirming its acceptance of the security guarantees with Ukraine, with European countries, and with others, right? And then that's a huge success for Zelensky, because you would like to get the Americans involved in the guarantees, supervision of air power. That's also politically as well as militarily important. If you get that, it's a really important leverage that you have with the Russians. Because when you go into further discussions with the Russians, it's not, will there be security for guarantees for Ukraine? It is, here are the security guarantees for Ukraine. Are you going to accept them? If the Russians say yes, you've got the guarantees. If the Russians say no, they look like the bad people standing in the way of an agreement. The problem is that there may be some within the Trump administration, I'm certain there are, you just alluded to them, who are saying, well, we can't give final confirmation on security guarantees unless the issues are resolved in the talks. Territory, status of Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant, Ukraine's recovery. Can't talk about security guarantees till everything else is agreed and the Russians have accepted. That is another reason why the Russians went to Abu Dhabi. They could not afford for these security guarantees to be confirmed. Because if the security guarantees are confirmed, they go into the future from a position which is weaker. So to keep the security guarantees from being implemented, Russians say, okay, we'll talk. What I get out of the Zelensky statement is that the Russians have not succeeded in taking the security guarantees off the table. They have not been able to go to Abu Dhabi and insist that there be no mention or no further discussion of security guarantees. But on the other hand, Ukraine doesn't have confirmation of the American involvement. Remember the other thing that came up at Davos, or that could have come up at Davos? It didn't come up specifically, but it was this question of U.S. involvement in Ukraine's recovery fund. At one point, we thought they were going to discuss an $800 billion plan for support for Ukraine. And, you know, the combination of recovery and U.S. taking profits out of investments, et cetera. That didn't specifically come up at Davos, but I think the general principle did. Again, Zelensky wants to get some type of definition of this. If you could get a definition of the U.S. involvement in Ukraine's recovery, it will help lock them into the security guarantee. But he's not there yet. And that was why he put out that message, that latest message on social media.
United States, Ukraine and Russia held trilateral talks in Abu Dhabi this weekend for the first time since the full-scale war began in 2022. Ukrainian officials described the talks as positive and constructive. Another round of negotiations is scheduled to take place in Abu Dhabi again on the 1st of February. How close are we to a deal, and what is your reading of this another push for peace?
Well, it's hard for me to know how close it really is. I mean, the the Ukrainian government and the representatives there, they know what's at stake. They know that they absolutely cannot trust Putin or the Kremlin, and I fear that they also know that they really cannot trust the U.S. And so they're having to participate in this in hopes that eventually there will be some breakthrough somewhere that would assure Ukrainian sovereignty and also lead to some sort of a security guarantee. But I think this is a case where President Zelensky and his team are doing everything they can to demonstrate good faith to bring about a negotiated settlement. But at the same time, they know that they cannot, it's not acceptable to give up Ukrainian territory and therefore Ukrainian people over to the Russians. So that's the part where the Russians have said over and over that they're not going to negotiate. And so whether, somebody says we're at 90%, 95%, doesn't matter. If that last 5% is the part that the Russians will not back away and Ukraine cannot back away, it's going to be difficult.
You just mentioned about these positive statements, but by U.S. negotiators also speaking at Ukraine event in Davos on Thursday morning. Steve Witkoff, Trump's special envoy, said there had been significant progress in the peace negotiations with the Ukrainians. Quote, "I think we have got it down to one issue, and that means it's solvable," he added in reference that Zelensky later said was to the Donbas territory. Is the Donbas issue solvable one?
Well, this is why I absolutely don't trust Mr. Witkoff when he says there's only one thing remaining, but the one thing is the most important thing. I mean, this is a real estate salesman talking like a real estate salesman. He has never cared or understood why the war started. He's never once said that the Russians were the aggressor, nor has President Trump. I think he's been to Moscow 7 times, and he's never been to Ukraine. So, all he is interested in is getting the deal. Bad luck for the millions of Ukrainians that would be on the wrong end of this. And so, of course, I'm an outsider. I'm sitting here in a nice, safe, warm place. The enormous pressure on Ukrainian people, on the Ukrainian government, on President Zelensky, trying to bring an end to the war, but at the same time making sure that what Ukrainians have been fighting for all these years is not thrown away, because without a doubt, nobody can trust Vladimir Putin or the Russians to live up to any agreement if they're not forced to, and they have made it clear that their objective is Ukrainian territory. So I think, I trust President Zelensky and his team. They know what's going on, and they know what they can do.
Also, I would like to quote an interesting article by Axios. Quote, "At the end of the second day of talks, 3 teams sat together for a working lunch." Quote, "There was a moment that everybody looked almost as they were friends. I had a sense of hope," U.S. official told Axios. Why are they so optimistic, over-optimistic, I can say?
It's naive. They're naive. There are people that still believe that somehow Russia is this great country that really just wants to, be a responsible part of the international community. Nobody should believe that. Russians, they might smile right into your face and while they're, killing your family. Let's keep in mind the people representing the Kremlin at these conversations are also representing the government that is killing Ukrainians every night. Ukrainian civilians, children, every night. So this, how ridiculous for somebody to say, oh, it was like they were almost friends. What a stupid statement.
Let's also cover this morning article by Financial Times. It seems like US is trying to blackmail Ukraine with this security guarantees to force Ukraine to cede Donbas in exchange of so-called security assurances. Trump administration has signaled to Ukraine that US security guarantees depend on Ukraine agreeing to cede the Donbas region to Russia, according to Financial Times. Reported this morning, Washington also indicated it could offer Ukraine more weapons to strengthen its army if Kyiv agrees to withdraw forces from the Donbas. What is your reaction to this development?
What an embarrassing proposal by the United States. And I think there's no way that Ukraine could agree to that. I mean, I would, based on what has happened over the past year, I can imagine that Ukrainian leaders would want to see some real proof, some evidence that the United States would actually live up to its agreement. Even during the time of the Biden administration, we did not commit to doing everything necessary to help Ukraine. And this administration certainly has not done that. And so why would anybody believe for a second that the Trump administration, which has not even provided weapons that were needed so far, would now all of a sudden agree to send U.S. troops in there as some sort of a guarantee after Ukraine agrees to pull back from Donbass? I mean, that doesn't make sense to me. And of course, it's all still based on this false narrative that somehow, Russia's going to win the war anyway. So come on, Ukraine, go ahead and do this. That's just not what's happening on the ground. And of course, the Ukrainian leadership knows that. I think the key here is our European supporters of Ukraine really need to make it clear where they stand on this, because I think they also, especially after everything that happened in the last week, Europeans don't believe that the United States would actually fulfill any kind of a guarantee. And it is very hard for me to say this because I'm happy, I'm proud of what my country has done for so long for European security. But right now, this administration is destroying decades of trust. So I think the President Zelensky's administration probably is very skeptical of this kind of a guarantee.
So President Trump is just saying first surrender Donbas to Russia, and then we can provide any kind of security guarantees. But will Ukraine ever need any kind of US security guarantees in case of such withdrawal from Donbas?
Well, yes, because if Russia gets what they want, I mean, more of Donbass without even being able to capture it on the battlefield, I don't think anybody in Ukraine believes that that's it, that Russia will then be satisfied. So this is where I think the United States should play a role of providing that security guarantee, because it's in the interest of the United States that we have stability and security in Europe. That would require, though, the administration to acknowledge that Russia is the aggressor, that Russia is the one responsible for this insecurity and instability. I just don't see them. I mean, that would be a remarkable turnaround for the Trump administration to acknowledge that. And I just don't see that happening, unfortunately.
Don't you think that Trump's administration just pretends to be ready to provide the security guarantees to force Ukraine to surrender Donbas, but is not serious about this in case of Russia attack?
Based on everything that the administration has done over the past year, I would not accept it at face value that they would fulfill any sort of guarantee like that.
In case of Russia's attack on Ukraine after the war ends, after ceasefire is reached, do you expect US to react in case of such attack, at least make any kind of statements or commit air power, or President Trump would just try to make another deal in such case?
Well, of course, I don't know, but there's no evidence over the past year that would give me confidence that they would really do any of that. I mean, that would be much more difficult to do than just providing tomahawks, for example, or putting real meaningful sanctions on the Russians, or taking hard steps. It would be much more difficult to do something after the fact than it is now. And if they're not doing it now, then I'm skeptical. But look, we cannot forget, Ukraine is not an island. It's attached to Europe. And European allies have got to quit sucking their thumb and wringing their hands and complaining about Trump. They have got to accept the fact that European security depends on Ukraine's success. And so a real commitment of money, of weapons, of ammunition, helping in everything that Ukraine needs. Europe is going to have to do that, especially since the United States, I think, is not going to do it under this administration. And so it's in the interest of Europe that Ukraine does not fail, that Ukraine is successful. And I think that hopefully we'll see more and more European countries begin to accept that responsibility.
From your perspective, what kind of end game would ensure Ukraine's security and stability, from your perspective, in terms of security guarantees, in terms of the ceasefire deal, but a possible realistic one, end game that will end this war, but also will ensure Ukrainian security?
Yeah, well, the only thing that ends this war is when Vladimir Putin realizes he cannot win, that there is no way. And for that to happen, his oil and gas infrastructure has got to be wrecked so that he cannot continue to export oil and gas to pay for this war. That's one thing. The second thing, European countries have got to demonstrate that they are solidly with Ukraine. Not just pictures hugging President Zelensky, but actually delivering real capability to show that they are with Ukraine. And then the third thing, of course, is Ukraine itself has got to continue the transition to be more and more like Israel, maybe, or kind of a mix of Israel and Finland, where you've got a strong industrial base, high quality reserves that can rapidly be mobilized, and a total commitment of the society. The whole society is involved in the defense. And I think these are the things, this is what success is going to look like for Ukraine. I think, obviously membership in the European Union would be very important. But part of it is destruction of Russia's ability to continue to wage the war. Part of it is absolutely clear support from Europe. And then part of it is Ukraine continuing to make itself indigestible.
Let's also cover another development. We didn't have the chance to chat about this, but earlier this month, Russia has fired intermediate range ballistic missile, or Oreshnik, at my city of Lviv. But this missile was without the payload. It was seen as message to the West. Don't you think that this could be another sign of Vladimir Putin's and Russia's desperation?
Yeah, this, it's funny. I talked to a friend of mine that lives in Odessa, and she said that Ukrainians are more worried about Kinzhal than they are this Oreshnik, that the Oreshnik really was, it sounds terrible, and the speed of its flight and all that, but, unless you put a nuclear warhead on it, it's not as bad as Kinzhal missiles, was her view. And you're right. The target was not actually Lviv. It was the heads of Europeans. It was a warning to them: don't be involved in some sort of peacekeeping force or whatever. And so, I think that the Russians, about once every 2 or 3 weeks, they will do something or say something to remind everybody that they have nuclear weapons. But they've been doing this now for the last several years. And I think that, again, our European friends need to quit worrying about what Russia might do, and instead, Russia should be worried about what they might do.
Do you expect another Russia's provocations against Europe, and do you feel that this Oreshnik missile strike changed something in European policy thinking?
No, I don't think, at least I have not seen evidence that it has changed anybody's thinking. That's not a surprise that Russia has that weapon. I think that I hear more and more Europeans talking in terms of they recognize that Russia is not undefeatable, that Russian victory is not inevitable. I think Europeans have got to have got to rediscover their self-confidence and commit to Ukraine security, because it's the best way to secure all of Europe.